This is part 2 of an introduction to feedstuffs, and in the last series, part 1, we talked about the International Feed Numbering System. In this one, we're going to talk about the more generalized system that's used sometimes by commercial feed manufacturers here in the U.S. This group is called AFCO, the Association of American Feed Control Officials, and it's an organization that supports good feed manufacturing practices and enforces some of the labeling laws and makes sure that we have a quality product going out to the consumer. The AFCO system, or the system that's used by most of the commercial plants, uses a more generalized labeling system to allow for more flexibility in the manufacturing process. They group feeds into certain categories so that they don't have to recreate the label every time they create, or they have to update a ration and tweak an ingredient or so that may be in the ration. Some of the AFCO categories that are used are animal protein products, which could be meat and bone meal, tankage, bone meal, blood meal, those types of products, but it allows maximum flexibility for somebody that's producing a label. They can change those products in this animal protein product to allow them to find cheaper feedstuffs and still balance a ration and provide a consistent product. Some of the other categories you'll see are forage products, grain products, plant protein products, processed grain byproducts, roughage products, or molasses products. If we take a look at the feed label that we have next to us, you'll see that the first several ingredients are grain products, processed grain byproducts, plant protein products, roughage products, and molasses products. It has several of these general categories. This is an inexpensive feed, and it's going to be one of the things as you look at pre-made feeds. The more specific the ingredient list is, the more expensive the feed is going to be because they have to stay with those products on the label. By using these generalized categories, it gives manufacturers the flexibility to see if corn is cheaper than barley or if sorghum becomes cheaper than corn. By using the general term grain product, they're able to flex within that and keep the same nutrient densities within the diet, but have that flexibility and not have to redo their label every time. So it is an indication of feed quality, and generally the less expensive feeds are going to have more of these generalized category names in that feed label. So let's talk a little bit about these feed classes that we've been discussing, whether it's the roughages, the dry roughages, the energy feeds, the protein supplements, or these other classes we've talked about. If you remember, we had that magic line that we talked about, which was at 18% crude fiber. That's a number you're going to need to remember, okay? So we have crude fiber on this side axis. You're wanting to remember that 18%. Because what happens is feeds that are above 18% are going to be considered roughages. High fiber, bulky feeds that are going to be generally incorporated more into herbivore-based diets. Some of the omnivores, but mostly herbivores, will consume the roughages. Below that line, we have the concentrates. Those feeds that are less than 18% protein. This is going to be our high energy, high protein feeds. Some of our vitamin and mineral supplements, they don't have a lot of roughage or fiber to them as well. So it is very important to understand and be able to define roughages versus concentrates. An example of why we need to know this is a lot of times in ruminant diets like feedlots or dairies, we talk about the roughage to concentrate ratio. What proportion of the diet is high fiber components and what proportion is lower fiber or more of the energy and protein feeds. So be sure you can define roughages and concentrates. If we take this diagram one more step and draw one more magic line at the 20% crude protein mark, now we're able to divide our feed classes into some different categories. For example, if we have feeds that are over 20% crude protein, those can be classified as protein supplements. Think category 5 from the IFN system. Then feeds that are less than 18% crude protein or crude fiber and less than 20% crude protein that fall into this category here, those are our high energy feeds. Think category 4 from the International Feed Numbering System. Let's take a look at where some of our common feeds that we would utilize in a variety of animal rations may show up on this table. Crop residues that we'll be discussing in a future slide, things like straw, corn stalks. If you think about it, does straw have a lot of feeding value? What do we typically use straw for? Generally, it's used as bedding because it is extremely high in fiber and very low in protein and actually has very little feeding value. We could increase that protein level just a little bit and drop the fiber level a little bit. And in some of our lower quality grass hays, we start to see an increase in that feeding value as either the fiber levels drop or the protein levels increase. Our good quality grass hays tend to drop into the 30 range of crude fiber and will have between 10 and 15% crude protein. Really good legume hays such as alfalfa, down in the southeast they use a perennial peanut hay. Those can actually be over 20% crude protein and can function as a protein supplement in some level, but they are still over 18% crude fiber, so they are still classified as a roughage. If we look at our concentrates that are below 18% crude fiber, those that are very low in protein are generally our food byproducts. A classic example of this is bakery waste, which is literally expired baked goods that are ground up and can be fed to animals. They are extremely energy dense. Think dried up ho-hos or cinnamon rolls or whatever you want to, bread. That is extremely digestible, high energy, but there's not a lot of protein in there, so they fall into that concentrate category, but the lower protein side of it. Our cereal grains usually have anywhere from about 9 to 14% crude protein in them, and they're going to fall into that concentrate category, but have a little bit more feeding value than the food byproducts because of that little bit higher protein level. Sorry, I want to go back to that real quick. Let me pop these back up real fast. This is just to give you a generalized idea as we talk about the different feed classes, where they fall into. Example of a protein supplement that's going to be a concentrate. If we were to take this line out here to about 50% crude protein, we would have soybean meal. The brewer's grains would fall into this 20 to 25% protein range. We have a lot of other feeds that could go into here. The main thing is just to understand what happens to feeding value. As we increase protein or decrease crude fiber, we're going to see an improvement in the feeding value. Legume hays and good grass hays have more value than poor grass hay and crop residues. Grains have more feeding value than food byproducts as a generalized rule of thumb because of that increased protein and feeding value. That wraps up the summary of the feed classes. For this week, there are some definitions that you're going to need to know. In the assigned reading in the textbook, there is a section of definitions, and these words are going to be ones that you need to know that will be on the quiz, that or potentially will be on the quiz or the exam over this first section of material. So take a minute and write down these words or highlight them in your book. There'll be a couple slides of them. You have quite a few that you will be responsible for learning. This is the second round of feed manufacturing terminology that you'll need to know. And the final slide, the last few terms that manufacturing terminology that you will need to know. This is going to conclude the second part of this introductory video on feedstuffs. You'll be moving on to the energy feed video series.